Greetings. This is Jed Shlackman. I'm a holistic counselor and energy healer. And for this video, I'll be speaking about the topic of moral injury, which is a term that's been coined or phrased in the field of psychology in the last few decades or so. This phrase is used to describe what I would refer to as the psychological and spiritual wound that people may experience after being involved or being witness to actions that are in conflict with their own sense of morality or moral beliefs. So that's why it's called a moral injury. The coining of that phrase was prompted by what some Vietnam War veterans were reporting after their military service. This isn't just something that applies to war veterans. This can apply to anyone who feels some shame, guilt, regret, self-condemnation, self-hatred, or grief about the damage to their sense of self and of being a good or worthy person that's occurred. The healing process is one of self-forgiveness and deeper understanding of life and our spiritual journey. So without touching on that level, on that deeper metaphysical or spiritual aspect of life, it's hard to resolve these moral injuries. Human beings will all pretty much at some point experience some form of shame for having failed to conform to their own moral or ethical values. Sometimes, to try to avoid feeling or experiencing that emotional pain of moral injury, people may try to be in denial about even having acted immorally or having harmed others. However, denial will often just lead toward even greater acts of harm toward others and deeper wounds. So really the only solution is to face and integrate those experiences, what you might refer to as facing and integrating the shadow aspect of self. The shadow being the aspects of ourself that we tend to deny, to suppress, to avoid acknowledging. So it's important to be able to acknowledge that within ourselves there is that capacity to act in ways that we might judge or label as immoral or unethical. We're not always going to be able to meet the standards, the values that we have. Different situations or circumstances in life might in some way push or influence us to do things that we really don't believe in, that don't match our values. And after that's happened, we have to be able to come to terms with that, to accept it, to acknowledge that potential within us, so that we're not suppressing it and feeding into that shadow. We're not, in a sense, fragmenting ourselves or dissociating. When we do that, it leads to that part of ourself that could do those things to sometimes just erupt or pop up from the subconscious and lead to an impulsive action where we're not able to be more present or conscious in that moment to make a different choice. So separation or fragmentation of different aspects of ourself just carries us deeper into that divide, into that internal schism or conflict. So we want to work on being able to be present with those experiences, with that potential within us to do those things that we may view as immoral, so that we can have an understanding of that self segment or self fragment not to resist or reject it, but to just observe it, to understand it, so that when the situation might arise again, we can consciously choose to not revert to that behavior, to that pattern, that we can connect to a greater aspect of ourself that doesn't get drawn into that reaction or impulse. If you think of different situations in your own life, you might be able to remember or recall times where you regretted something you did, where you acted in a way that didn't reflect what you believed that you actually value, what you consider to be moral. We can recognize that without attaching to some shame or some self-rejection. We can see that we all have that potential. We don't have to be ashamed about it. We can just be mindful of it. We can realize it's part of the human experience, the contrast of dark and light, you could call it, experiencing what you would view as positive and negative in life. We can't expect to be a perfect model or reflection of the things that we claim to value or that we believe are our values and ethics. We're always going to have some situations where we don't meet our own standard, and that's okay. We're not going to be condemned. We're not going to be cast out of heaven or cast out of creation for having those human limitations. So it's all a process of learning and growing. And we are all, in a sense, segments or fragments of the Creator. Each one of us is a stream of self-aware consciousness that's come into this human experience to play these different roles, to be parts of all these dramas of life. And part of what we're learning is forgiveness, is compassion for self and others. So if we didn't have those supposed mistakes, there wouldn't be something to learn to forgive and accept. So it's all part of this holistic process of contrast, of experiencing the shadow and the light, of experiencing suffering and redemption, etc. So give yourself that compassion, that self-forgiveness, that understanding that those things that have happened, any supposed moral failings you might see in yourself, those are not the totality of who you are. They're just kind of a momentary experience, a temporary snapshot of your entire journey of life. So it doesn't define you. It is really just an experience, just one step along your path. And you don't want to get frozen or stuck in that particular frame or step. You want to be able to release it, to go forward in your life, to move into new experiences, new versions of yourself, to not attach to that identity of being a moral failure. That's not really who you are, and it is something that you can forgive yourself for. In a sense, you can accept that there's nothing in an ultimate sense bad or wrong about having had that experience. It's all part of a greater learning process. Every single one of us is going to move beyond our human experiences. We carry these memories, these experiences into our soul to be processed and integrated so that our soul can continue to evolve to move forward on its journey, its path of experience and co-creation. So we can expand our awareness into that broader perspective, into that spiritual context or framework from which we can observe those things that we've experienced as a moral injury. And as we're able to do that, the injury is able to be healed in a sense. It's kind of like a scar on your body that initially it's raw, it's a wound, and your body has its intelligence to repair that, to heal it, to restore the body into a state of wholeness. We can do that as well psychologically when we feel some wound, whether it's grief, sadness, fear, anxiety, anger, regret, shame, guilt, etc. We can use a higher understanding to kind of act as a salve for those wounds, to help them repair themselves, to bring us back into a stable sense of self, a sense of self-acceptance essentially, where we can love and value ourselves even if we've at some point betrayed our own values. So this is an insight I want to share here, that moral injury is something that can heal. It's something that everyone in some way or form does go through at some point in life, or in your multiple life journeys, multiple lifetimes. So you may look upon your present life and think there's nothing really serious or major you've done that you look at as immoral, and you might look down on other people who have done things that you're judging as immoral, but your soul may have other incarnations where you did things that from your current point of view would severely betray your moral values. You might have killed someone, you might have robbed someone, you might have raped someone, all those kinds of things. Our souls have those experiences in different lifetimes, and we're not attaching to that identity. We don't look at ourselves forever as that persona that committed that act. We recognize that we've moved on. Well, it doesn't have to be just moving on from one incarnation to another. It's also moving on from one moment in our present life to subsequent moments in our present life. We're not attached to that act, to that memory of what's previously occurred. We're just becoming, evolving as we grow. Moral injury is something that's often present with post-traumatic stress. So the example of someone who was involved in combat in a war, that person had traumatic stress. Part of that stress could be the moral injury, something they did that they later feel regretful, ashamed of, something that conflicted with their own moral sensibility. So not only is it the shock of what's occurred, the difficulty processing death, injury, etc., but also the moral aspect that you might have done something you feel ashamed of. So with PTSD, sometimes that's part of the constellation of factors that are present. Sometimes it's having witnessed someone else do something that you see as horribly immoral. So it might be witnessing a relative, a parent or sibling committing an immoral act. It could be witnessing a prominent person in your community, such as a doctor, a teacher, a minister, etc. So that can affect your sense of self as well. So these are all things that it's important for us to acknowledge and process if we desire to heal, to be more at peace within ourselves and more at peace with life, to accept that there is both quote-unquote dark, quote-unquote light, both sides of the polarity spectrum. Life, in a sense, has to contain both. It wouldn't be the learning adventure that it is if we only had the light, if there was nothing sad or painful, nothing antisocial, etc. Those are all part of the journey, and we don't want to reject their existence. It's important to acknowledge them, and in doing so it enables us to be more present, to be more conscious in our choices and our actions. If we suppress, if we resist or deny things, they'll actually tend to persist more, influence us more, since they're built up then in the subconscious, and it's the subconscious that has a great effect on our actions and reactions to life experience. I hope that this presentation has given you some insight, some ideas about how to proceed to heal some of those issues, to find more inner peace, more self-acceptance. For those that are looking for holistic healing resources, I invite you to view my website, phinsights.com. That's phinsights.com. And for now, I want to wish each of you a wonderful day. Namaste.